Well, hello, everybody. I guess this might be a good time to start this webinar. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. You're here to learn more about the V-Ray 6 for Cinema 4D release, and we are here to talk about it. So at the very start, let me just give you a small introduction or a short introduction. Who is your host for today? That's me. My name is Nate. I'm a 3D artist / tutorial guy here at Chaos. And I'll be basically the voice behind this presentation. Now, there's other team members here. We're going to talk about them just a little bit later on. But for now, it's just going to be me that you're going to be listening to. So again, hey, everybody. Welcome to the V-Ray 6 for Cinema 4D webinar. V-Ray 6 is quite a big release for us. There's a lot of features that we're introducing with this release, a lot of features that make creating things that were previously really hard to create. It makes that process a lot easier, a lot better, honestly. There's also features that are going to make your everyday workflow a lot easier, a lot better. And so there's really a lot to talk about. But now, before we actually dive deep into what those features are, let's just first talk about the agenda or the presentation order that we have set for today. So we're going to start off by doing a little bit of a feature presentation. So we're going to go through some of the most notable or some of the most important features that are there for this release. And we're going to try to condense that to around 15 minutes, although there's so many features that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hit that mark. So it might be 20 minutes. So you'll have to excuse me for that. We're going to follow up the feature presentation with a guest presentation by 3D Render and Beyond team. So we've got Viola and Stefano. I hope I got your names right here, guys. They're going to be doing a bit of a presentation of their own, but let's keep it a secret about what exactly they're going to talk about. I mean, obviously it's going to be V-Ray 6 related, but let's keep the rest a secret, right? After their presentation, we're going to be hosting a bit of a Q&A session, because that is really why we like doing these webinars. We like to get in touch with you and answer all of your questions. This is a big release. We're pretty sure there's going to be some questions, right? And that's why we're here to answer those questions. And there's a whole team in the background. Maybe you can already see their webcams, but we're going to do more formal introductions a little bit later. For now, let's just focus on the feature presentation. We're going to start with presenting the big new wow feature that is in V-Ray 6, which is the V-Ray procedural cloud. So we all know HDRIs are really cool. They're fun to use, but they're really hard to customize, right? You want to move the sun around a little bit, kind of hard to do. You want to add or remove clouds or just move them around, hard to do. So typically you resort to the procedural V-Ray sun and sky system, which is great. It looks awesome, but it's missing clouds, right? Well, not with V-Ray 6, because with V-Ray 6, we're introducing procedural clouds. So the clouds you see on this render on the right side, that's what we're talking about here. So they're supposed to look great. They're supposed to be easy to use. And well, in my opinion, they're just awesome all around. And you don't need to just, well, they're not supposed to be just used for still images. You can also animate them. And what you see here is an animation for those procedural clouds that we rendered out. Okay, so there's obviously all kinds of different lighting scenarios you can achieve with them. They will react to the sun's position, to how the sky is, right? So all of that is sort of going to seamlessly and realistically work together. But now, how to use procedural clouds? Well, all in all, it's real easy. So we have our little scene here, and it's looking arguably kind of cool already, but it is missing that realistic ingredient, the clouds, right? So how do you work with clouds? Well, it's real easy. You just go into your V-Ray sun object, right? You go under that clouds menu, and you just turn the clouds on. And just like that, you have clouds in your scene. And it's really that easy to use. Now, obviously, there's parameters that you can tweak. There's a couple, but they're designed to be really easy to use. So you can tweak, for example, the density, more or less clouds, right? You can do stuff like adjust the cirrus cloud amount and so on and so forth. So there's a couple of parameters. Everything's a slider, so it all should be easy to use. And obviously, if you animate all these values, you can actually create animations. So those are, in a nutshell, the procedural clouds. And as you can see, the results are convincing, are realistic, and everything's just really easy to use. I mean, I probably shouldn't have favorites, but this is probably one of my favorite features. Next up, we have V-Ray decals. Now, this is another awesome one because it makes creating decals a lot easier. You don't have to worry about UV mapping anymore. You don't have to worry about selection tags anymore. You just create a V-Ray decal object, you apply a material to it, and then you just position that object so that it points at the object where you want to project that decal. That's kind of it. Again, no UVW unwrapping or such. In this case, on the right side here that you see, this number 6 is a decal, right? So here's a full screen image or a render of that image. And it doesn't have to be all sci-fi related, right? You can use decals, like for example, on this little notebook here, you got the V-Ray 6 for Cinema 4D, sort of a logo, if you will. And that's a decal. And we didn't have to unwrap anything to get that going. But now, words are words, right? So let's just take a look at how you would actually use decals, all right? So basically, all you have to do is you need to go under that V-Ray menu, under that geometry submenu, and you just bring in a V-Ray decal object. You can use Cinema 4D's place tool to kind of position this wherever you want to, all right? Although just make sure that it intersects with the actual object that you want to project the decal onto. Then you take your material. In this case, we have this number decal that you see here, okay? And the main thing is we're just cutting out the shape with an opacity map. So that's how we get that number 6. We're going to take this material, you apply it, we're going to apply it to the decal, and there you go. You have your decal working, right? So you can move it around, you can scale it up or down. No need to mess with UV maps or selection tags. It's just kind of seamless like that, right? Right. Okay. Well, then decals aren't just to be used with to put numbers on walls. You can actually put displacement on them. We've unhidden another decal object here that's being driven by a displacement texture. And this is this crack you see on the wall. It's actual displacement that's being sort of indented into that wall. And you can use decals for that as well, which I think is pretty useful. And then, you know, if you have a bunch of other decals in your scenes, well, then you can really easily add details. Here we've just unhidden a couple of grime decals. And adding details to your scenes, realistic details to your scenes like that can be really easy and really straightforward. And you can get great results going real fast. Again, without UV unwrapping, which is the bane of my existence personally. But now, one thing that I would really like to stress here with decals is that it's all about creativity with them. This is actually an image from the feature video that we had for the release of this V-Ray version for Cinema 4D. And this is the before shot, before the decals are added in. Now, if we go to the next slide, you're going to see that the decals are now in the scene. And the decals are actually those sort of objects, if you will, those details above the fireplace. So if we go back and forth again, right, if we switch between the two slides, you can actually see that the decals don't always have to be just some numbers or dirt and grime. It can be actual displaced geometry. So if you think about how you want to use decals, you should think about how versatile they are, because you can create holes in the walls, you can create stuff that's sticking out. You can do all that with decals. So they can be really useful. Next up, we have V-Ray Enmesh. And V-Ray Enmesh makes tiling 3D geometry onto surfaces real easy. All you have to make sure is that you have your surfaces unwrapped accordingly. All right. So in this case here, you can see that this n-gon sort of pattern is being sort of spread out in a fashion so that it looks like a fence. And we've done that with Enmesh. But now, explaining Enmesh can be a little bit confusing. So let's just take a look at how it looks like in action. It's going to make more sense real quickly. So we have our little sci-fi scene here. It's a little bit barren, but it'll do what we needed to do. We have our fence here, as you can see. It's this curved object, right? And it's been UV unwrapped properly. So in this case, we could use a cloner or something like that to put those n-gons and just make them bend according to the shape. That would be a little bit complicated to set up, potentially a little bit tiresome to edit. So we're instead just going to use V-Ray nmesh here. I'm going to go under geometry here. I'm going to bring in a V-Ray nmesh object. And then the first thing that I want to do is I want to select my source object, which in this case is going to be the fence itself. All right, then I'm going to hide the fence from being rendered because we don't actually need to see the underlying mesh. Okay, and then we're going to focus our attention on the reference object. So this is actually going to be the object that's going to get tiled. And it's just this model of this, I guess, n-gon shape is how I like to call it. And all we basically have to do here is we just need to drag it into the reference objects list. And then what we want to do is we want to set the crop box to fit onto this object. Okay, just like that, as you can see, we have something happening, but the tiling is all off. So no worries, that you can tweak that because you have some parameters here, like the tiling U and V parameters. So with these parameters, you can increase the tiling, and that way you can get that proper looking fence going in this case, right? You can also play with the offsets. That's also pretty big. So you can move the fence up or down or left or right. That's really useful. And ultimately, at this point, all you pretty much have to do is you need to apply a material to your nmesh object. And there you go. You have the sci-fi mesh going in just like minutes instead of having to fuss around with cloners and such. All right. But now if you take a look at the actual fence, you can see that there's a bit of a doubling of the line there. And in this case, we could adjust the geometry so that it tiles better. Or instead, what we could do is we could just adjust the crop box just a little bit. Okay, so we don't have to go in and redo the object, remodel it. We can just play with the crop box, and that way we can get it to tile perfectly. Okay, so that in a nutshell is what nmesh is. It enables you to tile 3D geometry onto surfaces like they were a texture. Okay. But it's not just useful for sci-fi things. Obviously, you can also use nmesh to add details, substantial details to, for example, this throw here that you see, right? So this pattern that you see, that's been created with nmesh. It's just been tiled. This 3D geometry has been tiled as if it were a texture, right? And so this is where really you can get creative with nmesh, and you can really try and do a lot of different things with it, right? Right, then we've got the ACES CG support that we're introducing with V-Ray 6 for Cinema 4D, which means that we now support the ACES CG workflow. Here's a bit of a before and after. This is an sRGB image. This is an ACES CG image. Just gonna go back and forth again. There we go. So in a nutshell, we don't want to go into too much detail here because it is a complex topic, but we do support the ACES CG workflow. If you're working in a studio environment, you'll be happy to know that now you can use ACES CG rendering primaries instead of sRGB ones, if that's important to you. You can also set your bitmaps to come in the ACES CG color space instead of the sRGB one. And obviously, as it was the case in the previous V-Ray versions, we also support the OCIO workflow. Okay, so all of that is now in place, and you can do your ACES magic there, right? Right, then we've got the V-Ray finite DOM, and the V-Ray finite DOM actually makes it a lot easier to incorporate objects into HDRIs. Now, your mileage will vary depending on the HDRI that you have and how professionally it was made, but by and large, this is a really useful feature for integrating objects into HDRI. So in this case here, as you can see, well, I guess we're going to skip ahead to the video. Now, there we go. As you can see, we have our little car here, and it's seamlessly, very nicely integrated into this HDRI. We're not using a backplate here. This is an actual HDRI that's been sort of tweaked using the finite DOM mode, if you will. Okay. But now let's take a look at how the finite DOM actually works. Okay, so we're in our scene here. If we just move around in the scene a little bit, you're going to see that the car really is not integrated at all into this HDRI. It's clearly floating in the air, right? So how does the finite dome help you here? Well, all you have to do is you need to go under that dome light. You need to go under the general menu and just toggle the finite dome to on. And then you play around with these parameters, to get it set accordingly to the HDRI you're using. And there you go. That car is much better integrated into the HDRI, and you can move around. And as you can see, things hold up rather well without using any backlights. Now, small tip here, if you put in a plane object into your scene, and if you make that plane a shadow catcher with the help of our tools that we make available for you here, well then, there you go. Now you even have shadows, which even further sort of increases the realism of this integration, if you will, right? Right, and in a nutshell, that's the finite dome. Then we have particle rendering support, or support for rendering particles, if you will. So as you can see, this robot foot here, particles around it, you can now render that, all right? You wanna create particles such as these ones, these little lights in the background, all particles, you can now render them out real easily. So how does it all work? Well, here we have an X particle simulation, okay, just some bubbles, and we also have a V-Ray particles object in our scene, and that's what really does all the magic. So in the V-Ray particles object, you have a bunch of parameters you can play around with. These parameters have been created to make working with particles easier for you. So you can, for example, up the multiplier for the particle count. You can change the rendering mode for those particles. You can do bubbles, splashes, points, fog, and so on and so forth. And you can even switch to a different particle type. So you can switch from Phoenix particles to V-Ray particles, okay? So there's a lot of different options you can play with. And, if you just apply a right material to a right kind of object, in this case, our little bubbles here, you can very easily create, very interesting particle simulations, if you will. Now, we're not going to go into too much details about particles in this webinar, but as you can see, the particle support is there now, and we support X particles, we support the thinking particles, and we also support the standard cinema for the emitter particles. Okay, now we're not done yet. We still have a couple of features to go over. I don't know if I'm over the time already, but let's just go at it. So as for the additional features, we are introducing a thin film layer, which makes it easy to create iridescent materials such as soap bubbles, oil spills, and you name it. How easy it is to use? Well, it's super easy. All you have to do is you need to open up your material editor, your material, go under the reflection menu, make sure that thin film compartment is open, and then just hit that enable thin film checkbox to on. And as soon as you do that, you've got your thin film going. You have a bunch of parameters you can play around with to kind of sort of customize the effect, if you will. All right. And it's not useful just for soap bubbles and oil spills, right? You can put it on windows. Windows sometimes have thin film like effects applied to it. So you can do all that now without having to worry about, creating these types of materials from complete scratch and doing gradient ramps and fall offs and things of that nature. You can just toggle that thin film layer to on, and you're good to go. Next up, we have enhanced V-Ray material energy preservation. So basically metals and rough reflective surfaces render even more accurately with this new energy compensation method. Here's a bit of a before and an after. And the idea here is that you don't have to worry about adjusting the reflection strength or stuff like that when you're increasing the roughness. All that is kind of going to be automated now, and you're going to have a much pleasant time and much more predictable, realistic results without really having to worry about anything. Okay. Then we've got VFB enhancement. So VFB got further improved. So let's just take a look at them here, shall we? First thing that we'd like to note here is if you right click somewhere in the VFB, you're going to have this menu pop up where you can choose to either select an object where that mouse cursor is at, or you can select the material where that mouse cursor is at, or you can also use that mouse cursor's position to set the focus point for your camera. So just some quality of life improvements in so many ways that will make your everyday workflow easier and more straightforward. But that's not all. we're also introducing proportion guides to the VFB. So now you can have those compositional lines in there, and you can do all of that artistic magic right inside the VFB without having to go out into the Cinema 4D's camera and use the compositional guides that are there. You can now have them straight in the VFB. But wait, there's more. VFB also now supports the panorama viewer. Okay, so if you load up a panoramic image, a spherical image, you can now view it directly in the VFB. Then we've got some improvements to render times. So translucent materials and V-Ray environment fog will now render even faster than they did before. And then by somewhat popular demand, I might say, we also, because we listen to our users, we also are introducing a light cache that works with interactive rendering. So you can get to noise-free results faster now, even in the interactive rendering mode. And also you can get that lighting to match between the interactive render and the production render. All you have to do is you need to open up your render settings, go under the interactive menu, and enable light cache in interactive toggle. Needs to be toggled on, basically. Okay, as soon as you do that, you'll have light cache in your interactive render. Now we're gonna, whoopsie, kind of ruined the surprise there. But now I'd like to ask Viola and Stefano to take over for their part of the presentation, which I'm assured is going to be pretty awesome. So Viola, Stefano, you ready?
Yes.
Yes, hi, and thank you, Nate.
Hi.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, here we go.
Condividi.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Sure can.
Okay. Okay, thank you again, Nate, for introducing us. Nate's already said, we are Viola and Stefano from 3D Render and Beyond. Some of you might know us as we offer V-Ray for Cinema 4D courses, 3D scenes, and private coaching. We are here today to share some useful tips and tricks regarding the amazing new version. We will see practical examples of some features. Let me see if I can move to the next slide. Okay, here. Of some of the features of V-Ray 6 in action in an architectural scene. So we will talk about consistency between versions, which is essential. VFB panorama view, clouds, mesh lights, decals, thin film, and mesh. And now I will let Stefano share all of these examples with you, so enjoy.
Hi everyone, let's begin. First of all, the best thing about V-Ray 6 is that it's an evolution of V-Ray 5, so the transition is absolutely smooth. You can open V-Ray 5 scenes and render them on the new release without having to worry about compatibility, inconsistencies, or other issues. We start to render. We can see that the results are pretty much identical to the previous version. This is very important because it means that you can start using V-Ray 6 right away and take advantage of the new features. Speaking of new features, let's see a few of them, starting with the VFB panorama view tools. I love 360 panorama. It's a great system that gives your customers an immersive experience without having to produce expensive animations. On V-Ray 5, you needed to use external tools or website like this, for example, for viewing the files. But version 6 has a new tool to preview the panoramas right inside the frame buffer. To create panorama is very simple. Just place a regular physical camera set on the vertical axis. Set the image ratio to 2:1. Then go to the override tab. set the camera type to spherical, override field of view, and set the field of view to 360 degree. And you're ready to render. Here I have already rendered one. As you can see, it's just a deformed image, and we cannot spin inside it. So let's go to view, select panorama view. And now we can use the frame buffer to explore our scenes. You can spin, pan, zoom, and see all the details. It is very useful. Let's move on to the cloud. HDR are a nice way to add clouds in our scenes, but to be honest, most of the time I end up using just standard physical sun and sky, because in the end it is much more flexible and the results are still great. That being said, clients may want a few clouds here and there from time to time. And now you can do that using the new cloud option inside the V-Ray Sun tab. Just activate the cloud over here. And you can already see some cloud here. Of course, you may want to tune some parameters. Add some nice zeros to add more complexity. And tune the position using the longitude and latitude offset. The cool part is that if you add some keyframe to this offset, you can create a nice cloud animation in no time. Another cool option is that you can even create ground shadows from the clouds, and they can also interact with environment fog to create amazing atmospheric effects. They are really nice and very easy to use. Now let's talk about mesh light. On V-Ray 5, there was no mesh light option to get light stripes, neon, and other complex light sources. So you always need some workaround to do that. On the old scene, for example, I created many individual lights, many individual area lights over here to create this shape. And I assigned the custom intensity for each one. Of course, this is not ideal. Now let's see how we can do that on version 6. We can draw a spline. We can check the length here, about 42 meters. This will help to set the overall intensity. Then use the sweep tool and insert the shape inside the mesh light. Assign the intensity, and we are done. We can do a test render. And it's perfect. Even more important, it matches perfectly the image rendered on version 5. You can see that here. It's pretty much identical. Of course, you can use the same technique for this neon light over here, but it will render much faster compared to version 5. Let's talk about decals. It is always important to add the details and imperfection to your scenes, and decals are a great way to do that. In the past, I've used the workaround for that, placing small planes slightly offset from the surface. It worked decently. It had some limitation though. Using V-Ray 6 decals, it's much easier. We can add it in our scenes from here. We can set the dimensions. Assign the material and use the transfer tool to get in the same position. And now it's perfect. There we go. Let's turn them off here and let's render. Perfect. It is very useful. The cool stuff is that decals not only adapt to flat surfaces, but they also work on curved surfaces. So if we move another decal over this concrete bench over here, it will be projected perfectly. Let's make it a bit bigger. And there we go. Of course, I need to turn a bit the direction, but there is no time for that. The best part is that this tool has an embedded displacement setting. Let's tune a bit the intensity. And there we go. Get this nice depth effect localized only on your decal surface. It's really amazing. Let's talk about thin film. I always suggest to my students to learn to observe and try to understand the real world. This will make you a better 3D artist. After over 20 years in the computer graphics fields, I still do that every day. Last week, I saw this interesting oil spill on a wet asphalt surface, and I thought this would be perfect for the new thin film shader. So let's go back to the parking lot of our museum scene. Here I have some Cosmos cars. I've just changed the color. I already added some decals for the crossroad and a decal for the oil. Of course, electric cars do not leak oil and should not park on crossroad, but hey, it's just a render, so it's fine. Let's check the oil shader. I've used the black diffuse, a small map for the opacity slot to get a bit of a jagged outline. A white reflection, and a bit of coating. Very easy. Now let's activate the thin film. Over here. And we can already see the effect. We can tune some parameters, starting with this. Still not perfect though. We are looking for this kind of iridescent effect. To simulate this, we can insert a noise inside the thickness blend. And now it is much better. Let's tune a bit the parameters of the noise, the scale. And let's also increase the contrast a bit. And there we go. We have this beautiful effect done in no time. Very easy. Let's talk about a mesh now. Here in the museum scene, we have this large gate made out of expanded metal. In V-Ray 5, I've made it using a displacement from my metal bundle. Let's start the render now. It worked very well. We have this nice displacement. But if you look closer from another angle, like this, for example, we notice that there is no thickness because displacement is just an extruded surface. So this is not the ideal tool. Now let's see how to get better results using V-Ray 6 and Mesh Modifier. We are going to use this geometry module. And we will use it on this surface following the UV coordinates. Let's add the image from here. Put the surface into the source object slot, and the expanded metal module inside the reference slot. Now we want to set the crop box so that the geometry will have a seamless styling. That should work. Let's start the render. Okay, it's nice. Still not perfect. Let's tune a bit the tiling and the height parameter, and we are ready. We have perfect details. Let's see how it works in the museum scene. And it is just perfect. And this time, no matter how close we look, we will always get perfect geometric details. Really nice. The best part is that it works perfectly also on carpet surfaces. Here, for example, I've used a knitted wool module across this cloth. The results are really amazing. You can see individual fibers with proper scattering. And this tool really opens a whole new level of detail for our render. It's really amazing. Well, I think that's all for today. Back to you, Nate, for the Q&A session.
All right, well, that was pretty fun. Thank you, Viola, and thank you, Stefano. I hope everyone enjoyed their part of the presentation. So, I mean, all in all, we wanted to present the features to you and then showcase some of the potential workflows to you. And hopefully now you're all excited about the Q&A section. This is the part that I think most of us enjoy the most because we get to interact a little bit. So for the Q&A, we have a bit of a team assembled here, okay? Let me first introduce sort of, I guess, the man of the hour in so many ways, Ivan Shaiko. He's the product manager for Cinema 4D. Want to give us a little wave, Ivan?
Hey, everyone.
Yeah, that's the product manager, everybody. Then we've got Yunal Zobu. He is a CG specialist. Hey, Yunal.
Hi, everybody.
And then, obviously, we have our awesome Viola. Oh, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
There we go. Well, you know how computers are sometimes. I got a bit of big fat warning on my screen. Anyway, we have the awesome guest presenters. Thank you so much for dropping by and preparing that presentation, Viola and Stefano from 3D Render and Beyond. So with the team all assembled now, let's go through some of the questions, shall we? So where do we start? Let's start maybe at the top. I think the first question was, and I think Ivan, you will probably be best fit to answer this one. Our user would love to see how scatter works in V-Ray for Cinema 4D. Is it robust as Octane scatter or like Redshift?
Yeah, well, currently there is still no scatter in V-Ray for Cinema 4D, but we are on the work, so it is coming. Maybe for the next release, we do have some results, so it will be coming. If you happen to see the Corona scatter in Cinema 4D, well, then this is what's pretty much going to be in V-Ray for Cinema 4D as well. So stay tuned for this one. And I can quickly go to the next question because I can easily see that it's for me as well. And it's, is there an easy way to transfer V-Ray materials between Cinema 4D and 3ds Max? Currently, no, but we're working hard to try and keep compatibility between our integrations. So very soon, we would be able to import V-Ray scenes. And with that, we would be able to import materials as well. So yeah, that will be coming soon as well.
And let's not forget, folks, some of these things might seem a bit trivial from a user perspective to implement, but we have obviously a pretty talented dev team, and these things are not trivial. So we're really trying hard at so many things, but there's only so much you can do from release to release. And certain things sometimes don't make the cut, or we need to change them because we just see that, you know, they need to be in the oven for a longer period of time. But just as a bit of an intermission, no bad questions, everything's good. So just feel free to pour out, ask anything you want to know, right? So I guess maybe if we just quickly change pace here and maybe we move on to Viola and Stefano. I think we have some questions for you. And specifically, I guess the question is, any news about the V-Ray Advanced training from you guys?
This is a tricky question. We're planning probably to do some live courses for the advanced training more than a recorded one, because a recorded one would probably take way too long. So we're planning on doing something live. So just stay tuned and we'll talk about it hopefully really soon. Okay,
I appreciate that. Hopefully that answered that. Kind of nice to see all these questions come in. Thank you, everybody. I guess if I just jump to the next one, which goes sort of like this, the quality, not the speed. Is it the same if I use GPU render instead of CPU? Because, for example, Corona Render doesn't have GPU render. Why? If I just may, and I think I'm going to pass the baton to Ivan later on, but I think these are very complex topics. Each type of hardware has its pros, has its cons. But by and large, you know, we believe all of them offer you to create realistic imagery. But, you know, each comes with its own workflow. But I guess that's how I see it from an artist side. What do you think, Ivan?
Well, I would say that you're very correct on what you said. They're pretty complex, to be honest, and usually it depends on the scene. It heavily depends on the scene and what you're trying to create. Sometimes the GPU memory might be a limitation. Other times, somewhere on the CPU there might be a limitation that couldn't be handled. So there isn't a good choice. I would say that my recommendation anytime is that people should experiment and feel free to use whatever they like.
I think that's a pretty good way to put it.
Yeah, because we've closed the gap between CPU and GPU features. So there are almost none of the features that are not supported on GPU, or at least those that are most commonly used. So I would say, yeah, people should feel free to experiment with this
and just decide for themselves, right?
Yeah,
I think it's worth noting, just in case, the V-Ray GPU and CPU are basically different vendors, but they produce very similar results, correct?
yeah, they should be considered as different engines, but closing the gaps between unsupported and supported features would at some point close this as well, so people would be able to use both engines as they see fit.
Okay, and I hope you don't mind, Ivan, just while we're talking about GPUs, because we have another question. Does the CUDA
sure.
option using GPU and CPU in dual world, I suppose the user here means in tandem, will be more stable in this new version?
Oh, I guess they're referring to the hybrid rendering.
Hybrid, yes.
Well, I would say that at least on our end here, when we were working with CUDA and CPU, I wouldn't say that it's unstable. Usually, this might depend on very different, there might be very different scenarios that might cause the issue. For example, if someone doesn't have the right driver, sometimes the driver might cause issues and stuff like this. So what I would recommend is to, whenever people have, or anyone, if anyone has any issues with instability or crashes or bugs, I would recommend and highly encourage everyone to report them to us so we can fix them, because we have done a lot of changes in the GPU code for V-Ray 6. Obviously, this is a major release for us, and there were a lot of changes that we made and improvements. So I would say that the problem might be fixed and might be stable, but it always depends on the scene. So the only thing I can really recommend here is please report everything that you have to us. This is the only way that we can make V-Ray GPU even more stable than it is.
And I can concur with that, because Ivan knows I've been sending in bug reports sometimes left and right, and they're always really, really happy to see them, which might seem a little bit weird, but that's how we improve these products, because really the general sentiment is we want to improve how things work. And sometimes you folks out there using it in production every day, trying out all these different things, that's the way things break. And that's when we need to know about them so we can fix them. So thank you for all of you who report bugs to us. We really can't thank you enough in so many ways. If I may, there's been a couple of questions and a couple of comments about the C4D tutorials. We are aware of that. We're working on them. We're just finishing the V-Ray tutorial series for Cinema 4D right now on YouTube. It's been a little bit delayed, if I'm being honest. It took a little bit more time than we wanted to, but because of that, we were able to go a little bit more in depth than we initially planned to. But rest assured, we're trying to dish out new content as we go and as we get better, okay? Now, maybe to warm up Yunal here a little bit, there's a question. Can you do multiple decals on the same piece of geometry?
Oh yeah, that's actually one of the advantages that you can stack as many decals as you want to. And basically you have to consider the Z order. So which decal goes over which one. So you can actually stack multiple decals over the same geometry. And another neat thing is that you can actually, if you have a decal placed on or projecting on a some type of a curved surface, you can actually utilize that one as well. So you can use a degree or just a slider, let's say, and limit the amount of decal you can see on that smooth surface. Something you cannot do with a plane, let's say, the workaround before the decals.
That's an in-depth answer, in my opinion. Thanks, Yunal. I think this is a question for you, Viola and Stefano. Does the pattern tool, so NMesh, work with deformers and dynamics? Have you by any chance tried it out?
No, we still do not have tried that in that way, but I guess it will absolutely work. We still
Ivan, you want
to?
Of course, of course.
So maybe that's for Ivan.
Oh, that's a good question, actually. I guess no, it shouldn't be working, but that's something that we need to look into.
I'm sorry, Viola, Stefano, you wanted to add something?
No, maybe I was wrong then. I still haven't tried it, so I really don't know.
No. Well, that's something that we haven't tried as well. So I guess my initial thought is that it shouldn't be working, but we'll
figure it out soon.
Yes.
Maybe now we're curious.
Maybe with deformers.
Yeah.
Dynamics. Don't think
Tonight we'll all try our deformers and dynamics and see if it works.
There we go. And if there are any bugs, we're going to report them.
Absolutely.
Next question. The X particles integration is great news. I was wondering if there will be a way to scatter custom objects with the particle system. I guess Ivan or Yunal?
That one's for me, of course, they will. This is the one little missing piece that we didn't have enough time to implement, and it's going to be coming soon. We are working on this one. Of course, a particle system that you can't scatter instances isn't really a particle system. You don't really always want to use points and spheres. Sometimes you want to use custom objects, especially for most of the animations with MoGraph and with particles.
Fair enough. I think that's a solid answer there. I guess there's also a question again about whether when Chaos Scatter will be completed. And in case you missed it, Ivan already kind of answered that. Obviously, we can give you specifics when it will be integrated for V-Ray 6 for Cinema 4D. But we are working on it, and we're hoping, but you didn't hear it from us, it'll be in one of the upcoming versions. Not that that tells that much, but you know how it is. Next question, has the integration between the VFB and picture viewer improved any? How can someone, for example, render more frames or queue render inside the VFB?
I guess I can get this one as well. We're constantly working on improving the compatibility between the V-Ray frame buffer and the picture viewer. But of course, some things are not really possible out of the box. And let's not forget that the VFB is built on a completely different framework than the Cinema 4D's user interface, and there isn't really fast way to do some things there. So we would need time to improve them. So currently there is no easy way to do that.
Fair enough. There's the answer. I guess I almost want to throw this one to you, Nal, but anyone can answer, of course. Can you view renders in the VFB at 100% and pan over areas to tweak post effects and zoom in and out and such.
Yeah, some of the missing UI stuff in our VFB, that's gonna be haunting us like for the upcoming versions as well, I guess. Yeah, you can do 100% zoom. Doesn't matter if you have zoomed out quite a bit or zoomed in quite a bit. If you double click on the VFB image, you can basically go to the 100% of the image resolution. Unfortunately, you cannot see any percentage anywhere in the VFB, but you can take my word for it. On the post effect part, sure, it doesn't matter if you actually render in interactive mode or you already have finished rendering and you want to just tweak stuff. Either you can, if it's, let's say, something related to interactive render, you can do a region, zoom to that region. If you want to be perfect about the zooming to the region, you can press the F key on your keyboard. It's going to snap exactly to that window, to that region you have selected. Then you can do the post work. And I guess that's it.
Pretty in-depth.
Maybe I can add a few things to this question, because Yunal mentioned that there are a few things missing in our VFB. So if you saw at the beginning of the presentations where Nate showed the new right-click menu where you can select objects, materials, and the focus point of the camera, we've slowly started to implement pretty much all of the missing features that the other V-Ray integrations have within the VFB. So one by one, we will have pretty much the same features that the other VFB, the other integrations have in the VFB.
Fair enough. Thank you for that, Ivan. So there's not that many questions left. Maybe we can answer these last two here, I guess. Let's see, how are we doing with the compatibility with the new Apple chips, M1, etc.? How is that looking? Is it all working? To
be honest, currently I'm using a M1 based machine here, and I'm speaking with you from it. And since we have added support for the M1 ARM processors, I've been using this machine pretty much every day to test stuff in V-Ray for Cinema 4D, and we've been improving some things. I have never really had any issues when working with M1 devices, so I would safely say that there are no issues with working with M1 machines.
We can confirm this because I, for example, have an M1 machine and I use it regularly every single day. And I can also add, regarding the question on the VFB and picture viewer and the render queue, that I always use the render queue and VFB. Obviously, you need to find a system to use them, but you can batch render as many renders as you want. And inside our community in Discord, we talked about it as well, because obviously you need to find a workaround. So it's a little bit more complicated, but you can just use the render queue and just render as many renders as you want. And then just, if you have different VFBLs, you can upload them in a second moment inside the VFB. So that's something you can absolutely do, even if it's not totally integrated at the moment.
That's really, thank you for that elaborate answer. So now we know M1's work, and thank you for that.
No problem.
Okay, so it's 7 where I'm at, which means we're sort of at the really tail end of this presentation and the Q&A section. Listen, I would just like to reiterate, thank you everybody for attending. And I would also like to extend the thanks for the team for being here, Ivan, Yunal, and our guest presenters from 3D Render and Beyond, Viola and Stefano. This has been, well, hopefully it's been a nice, well, I guess, learning experience for you all about what V-Ray 6 is, kind of how some of its new features work and all that. And we really appreciate you turning up to this event. We always like to see people interested in our products. And as always, we hope you understand there's a lot of time and effort and sweat going into these products. Yes, there are bugs. We appreciate anytime you can help us with that, because productions vary from user to user. Sorry, production methods. So thank you all. Thank you all for your effort as well. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for asking good questions. And before we end this one, I would actually like to invite you to the webinar that we are planning for October 27th, where Yunal is actually going to be the main man. And he's gonna, well, I'm just gonna let him tell you what that webinar is gonna be about.
Yeah, we are planning another webinar. Well, it's gonna be a bit more technical. We're gonna go over the major features with more examples and more story-driven, nice to a way to tell it, I should say. So yeah, I encourage you to sign up for that one. It's gonna be really fun.
For what it's worth, I will be watching what Yunal has to say as well, because the man is talented. Yeah, so thank you. Special thanks to our guest presenters. This was really also in large part thanks to you, this whole webinar as well. So if you want to learn more about them, go visit their educational content, go visit their website. It's 3D Render and Beyond. Viola and Stefano, everybody, would you have some closing words for us maybe?
Thank you. No, nothing else to add. No, thank you very much for having us. It was a really nice experience. And we can't wait to see the next webinar. We're really intrigued.
Yes.
Thank you as well. And for me and Ivan, I guess, and yeah, we're part of the Chaos team. You know where to find us. If you want to learn more about V-Ray 6 for Cinema 4D, go to the Chaos website. If you want to learn more about Cinema 4D, V-Ray for Cinema 4D, go on our YouTube. We will try to have more content out there. We're working on it. We also have documentation available, even for the new V-Ray 6 features. We're still obviously updating it. It's a fresh release. It's all still very new, but there's already content available online there. And with that, again, I hope I'm not boring everybody, but thank you all for being here. And until next time, take care of yourselves, people.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
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 Bye.